Now, in other news, police have used tear gas and flash grenades to disperse crowds in Portland and Oregon as protests against President-elect Donald Trump continue. Well, demonstrations are escalated into riots in Portland on Thursday night too, as protesters smashed cars and shop fronts. Police said dangerous and criminal behaviour led them to redefine the rallies there as riots. And as you can see, looking at this map, there are plenty of protests taking place in dozens of cities across America. In New York, they have focused around the Trump Tower. Most have been peaceful, but there have been some arrests there. Further down in Florida and Miami, people have blocked a highway there, and police are currently trying to remove them. And then in Washington, a tunnel has been blocked with people chanting anti-Trump slogans. So these are the latest pictures then from the Capitol, but plenty's been happening too on the West Coast and from California. Caleb Moppin sent this report.
So once again, the sun is down, and here in Oakland, the streets are filled with protesters denouncing Donald Trump, the president-elect, who recently won the vote. You know, some people that are watching this protest at home right now, right? They might be like, well, look, Trump won the election fair and square. Why are they protesting? Are they against democracy? What would you say to that person?
We're just doing what's right. This is what we need. We don't need Trump in office. He's just going to make everything worse. It's as simple as that.
So do you think, is there a way of preventing him from taking office?
We can all fight, do this every single day if we have to make sure that he's gone.
Trump, he did win according to the U.S. Constitution, so you're saying you're protesting against the American democratic system, right?
So did Hitler. That doesn't mean we have to accept the way this, as it is. We need to fight back against this fascist system.
To have democracy, you have to have an educated public. And the public schools have been progressively defunded both by Republicans and Democrats. And so the system as it is isn't promoting the democracy we have in our Constitution.
So the crowd of protesters has marched all the way up toward the highway. And as you can see, right in front of me, there's a line of police with riot gear on, shields, clubs at their sides, to prevent the protesters from getting onto the highway. Now the protesters are turning around in face of this crowd of police with clubs who are blocking them from getting onto the highway, as they've done on previous evenings in the protests in the aftermath of Donald Trump's election.
There's a Caleb Moppin there. Well, apparently some people have been so shocked by the result of the election they have had to seek psychological help, and some Democratic staffers were so upset that so-called therapy dogs were brought into Capitol Hill. So, are they overreacting? Well, RT's Ed Schultz discussed this with media analyst Lionel.
Since election night, the media has been covering violent anti-Trump protests across the nation, although many people have found more peaceful ways to cope with their disappointment. Some school districts and universities are offering counseling services to students who feel marginalized by Trump's rhetoric. Students at Cornell University staged a cry-in. The University of Kansas reminded students therapy dogs are available. A small elementary and middle school in Brooklyn held a community speak out with free hugs, healthy snacks, and poetry. Joining me for more on this, let's go to media analyst Lionel. You know what? What kind of kids are we? What kind of? When I was growing up, you know, we talked about at the dinner table watching Walter Cronkite. We talked about the Vietnam War. I mean, isn't this an issue of parenting? Explaining to your kids that life isn't perfect and sometimes there's going to be disappointments? I said on our election coverage on Tuesday night, the world's not going to come to an end.
Ed, I've got news for these kids. This isn't a coup. Imagine somebody from another planet who says, who are those Earthlings? What are they doing? They're turning over cars. Why? They won a championship. And what about those kids over there? They're beating the hell out of other people for exercising their franchise. It's called democracy.
Look, I understand that they're against Trump's agenda. there's no room for violence in any of this. But to the point where you need counseling and you have to hug kids and make them realize, I mean, what kind of world do they think this is?
Don't you remember when the conservatives were crying after Obama was elected twice? Oh, wait a minute, they didn't do that, yeah. And don't you remember when America's democracy and republic was held in abeyance, when we had to do the Supreme Court vote, when we didn't even know who won? Oh, that's right, we didn't. Don't you remember? No, there has been no other time. Ed, this is a mass hysteria fueled by social media, fueled by us, and I hope, and let me make sure I'm very clear about this. This is mocking derision, but it's fueled, and what happens is you give kids the idea that somehow this is okay.
Well, one of the groups involved in the anti-Trump protests is called Move On. Its website does call for people to rally against the president-elect, and it apparently has ties to billionaire investor and Clinton-sympathiser George Soros. Well, that's according to emails dating back to 2008, released by WikiLeaks from Clinton's campaign chairman, John Podesta, to George Soros. They gave tips on how to steer American voters, for example, financing groups operating at campaign rallies. Move On was among them. Yan Chikian has more.
Outraged by Donald Trump's victory in the presidential election, tens of thousands of people have taken to the streets across the U.S. to protest. Many demonstrators are refusing to accept Trump's victory. It looks like advocacy groups played a hand in organizing the seemingly spontaneous protests. Among them, an organization called Move On, which is funded by George Soros, a Hillary Clinton supporter and billionaire. The day after Trump was elected, the group sent out a press release saying,
"Within 2 hours of the call to action, Move On members had created more than 200 gatherings nationwide, with the number continuing to grow on Wednesday afternoon."
The presidential campaign showed there is no love lost between Donald Trump and George Soros, who was one of Hillary Clinton's top donors.
You are in a position where you're being attacked by Move On and these other very well organized radical left groups. You know it, your security knows it, Secret Service knows it. That's going to continue. Do you have a plan on how you're going to handle that?
Well, it is going to continue because the last person they want to face, the Democrats want to face, is me. And the last person Hillary Clinton wants to face is me.
That was during the election campaign. But apparently Trump's victory in the election didn't stop the Soros organization from campaigning against him.
Those who are stirring it up, and they do, many of them work for George Soros's front organizations, are really telling those innocent protesters and perhaps less innocent protesters that they're in danger, that they're endangered by Trump, even though Trump has done nothing but preach unity since he actually won the elections. In essence, what the opponents of Trump now are doing is exactly what they accused him of planning to do if he lost, which is disputing the results of an entirely fair election. It's an election where they've had all the media power and more of the money, and yet they've lost to him and to the voice of those ordinary people in the American shires who are normally ignored and forgotten.
George Soros is known for stirring up anti-government protests in other countries, and it looks like the upcoming Trump administration might see a few. The Soros organization went beyond protesting. Move On released a petition calling to change the U.S. Constitution and get rid of the Electoral College, which gave Trump his victory.
There are now some apparently well-funded attempts to undermine Trump's victory in the election. The irony is that many Clinton backers who are now slamming America's electoral system were praising it and scolding anyone who criticized it just days before the vote. In Washington, I'm Ganesh Chakyan, RT.
Well, other countries too have elected leaders that have sparked protests, although their democratic systems have not always been respected by the US. Here's RT's Miguel Francis Santiago.
Democracy, arguably one of the most used and abused words. But it's more than that. It's a principle. So surely there's a gold standard.
Our brand of democracy is hard. I believe in American exceptionalism with every fiber of my being.
This idea is rooted deep in the American mentality. We're so proud of it, we signed it into law with the Advanced Democracy Act. Yet it's still not enough. We Americans want every country in the world to be as perfect and fair as we are. So we spread these democratic values abroad.
We would never have defeated communism or pulled down the Berlin Wall from both sides We would never have placed before the world an example in action that has helped to triple the number of democracies over the last quarter century.
But this is what happens when we ignore a democratically elected president. Don't like your guy? Then sort out some regime change.
Assad has to go.
It's time for Assad to get out of the way.
The future of Syria can't include Assad.
Political transition to a new government without Bashar Assad.
And let all hell break loose. But sooner or later, that boomerang is going to come back and hit you. Isn't that right, America?
The liberal media so upset, visibly upset, about Donald Trump's victory.
You're awake, by the way. You're not having a terrible, terrible dream. Also, you're not dead and you haven't gone to hell. This is your life now. This is our election now. This is us. This is our country. It's real.
I'm hearing about a nightmare. It's hard to be a parent tonight for a lot of us.
So would you put money on seeing a revolution and regime change here in the United States? After all, one of the essences of democracy is freedom of choice. As Henry Ford once said, any customer can have a car painted any color that he wants so long as it is black. So long as the face fits, that is. I'm Miguel Francis Santiago.
Well, the protests against Donald Trump are not entirely limited to marches and riots. When a major shoe company endorsed the Republican, many were outraged by the decision. Consumers have begun posting videos and photos on social media of them either burning or discarding their New Balance shoes. Many say that they will never buy them again and that the company should be ashamed of showing support for Donald Trump. Election results only surprised those who were out of touch with the American people, though. That is the view of historian Stephen Cohen, who expressed that with Sophie and Co.
I would say that all these people who told you that Trump had no chance didn't know the America they lived in. And the reason is that the media, the opinion makers, live in New York and Washington, which is not the United States. I come from Kentucky. And Indiana, what you would call the provinces. And I knew from my friends and family down there that a lot of them were going to vote for Donald Trump. So it was only a question of a couple electoral states that they weren't sure he could get, and he got them. But a large part of the country was against Mrs. Clinton. What we don't know yet is whether this was primarily a vote for Trump or primarily a vote against Mrs. Clinton.